In a pulse-pounding twist, a gang of bikers harasses a woman at a gas station, completely unaware that her son is none other than Keanu Reeves, and what unfolds next is bound to completely turn the tables. The first gunshot exploded like a thunderclap, shattering the hushed reverence of the forest. Patricia's hands trembled as she aimed the revolver at the trunk of an ancient oak 20 yards ahead. She fired again, the recoil jolting through her slender frame. Tears streamed down her weathered face, carving paths through a thin layer of dust. This remote clearing, 5 miles from the nearest dirt road in rural Montana, had become her sanctuary and her prison. "Again," commanded Keanu, his voice cutting through the ringing in her ears. Her son stood behind her, arms crossed over his broad chest, eyes cold as January steel. "I can't," Patricia whispered, lowering the gun. The weight of it felt wrong in her hands, hands that had spent decades creating, not harming. "This isn't who I am." "It's who you need to become," Keanu insisted, stepping forward to adjust her stance. "They know where you live now. You can't hide behind your peaceful principles anymore." Patricia's throat tightened. Just 3 weeks ago, she'd been Patricia Taylor, respected costume designer and widow, living a quiet life in her Seattle home of 30 years. Now she was a fugitive, running from people who wanted her silenced permanently. "One more time," Keanu said, softer now. "Imagine it's him." Patricia raised the gun again, summoning the face of Senator James Harrington, the man whose secret she carried, the man who'd sent killers to her home. Her finger hesitated on the trigger. Behind them, a twig snapped. Keanu spun around, his hand already reaching for the concealed weapon at his waist. Patricia turned more slowly, the revolver heavy at her side. At the edge of the clearing stood a man she hadn't seen in 15 years, her former brother-in-law, Special Agent Robert Taylor. His FBI windbreaker was dusty from the hike, and his once black hair was now mostly gray. "Hello, Pat," he said, as if they'd seen each other just yesterday. "We need to talk." Keanu stepped between them. "How did you find us?" Robert's eyes never left Patricia's face. "Because I know her, and because whoever tried to kill her last week wasn't counting on me still caring where she goes when she's scared." The gun felt impossibly heavy in Patricia's hand as past and present collided in this remote Montana forest. Everything she'd been running from had found her again. 6 weeks earlier. Patricia's hands moved with practiced precision, pinning the intricate beadwork on the costume she was creating. The workshop of her Seattle design studio hummed, with controlled chaos around her, but in her immediate sphere there was only focus and precision. "The director's requesting changes," warned Lisa, the assistant who had worked alongside Patricia for over a decade. "Almost there," Patricia murmured, placing the final bead before stepping back. "Let's get these photos sent over and prep for the final fitting." As the team carried the costume toward the photography setup, Patricia removed her work glasses, rolling her shoulders to release the tension. At 57, the 12-hour design sessions took a greater toll than they had in her 30s, but she refused to slow down. Work had been her salvation after John's death 15 years earlier. "Ms. Taylor," a young assistant approached, holding out a message. "Your appointment from yesterday's consultation is here, the one with the unusual request." Patricia nodded, taking the note. The client had arrived around 3 p.m., a man with a commission that had puzzled her. The request had suggested government connections rather than typical film work. When she entered the meeting room, she wasn't prepared for what she saw. Though dressed casually, she recognized him immediately. Jason Miller, a former military officer who had served as Senator Harrington's head of security during her husband's investigation years ago. Her step faltered as 15-year-old memories crashed through the carefully constructed walls in her mind. John's voice echoed in her thoughts. "There's something wrong with the Harrington campaign finances, Pat. The numbers don't add up." Jason's eyes focused on her with growing recognition. He weakly reached for her hand. "Patricia," he said quietly. "Taylor should have known." "What brings you here?" Patricia asked professionally, maintaining her composure. "No time," Jason insisted, his grip tightening on her wrist. "They found John's files, their cleaning house. You're next." Patricia felt the blood drain from her face. What files? John's research was lost in the fire. Jason's laugh became a pained cough. Smart man. Your husband. Multiple copies. One's been sitting in a Seattle bank vault. My codename's on the access list. They tortured it out. Of me. Who did this to you? Patricia whispered. Same people who killed your husband, Jason replied, his voice fading. Wasn't an accident. The brake lines. Harrington's going for the presidential nomination now. Can't have loose ends. Before Patricia could respond, Jason looked over her shoulder in alarm. They followed me. You need to run. He pressed a small key into her palm before quickly leaving through a side exit. That night, Patricia sat in her home office, surrounded by old photographs and newspaper clippings about John's work as a forensic accountant for the Justice Department. His death in a car accident had been ruled mechanical failure, cut brake lines on a rainy Seattle night. She'd always suspected there was more to the story, but grief and fear had kept her from digging deeper. The next morning, she visited the bank Jason had referenced. Using John's birthday and their anniversary, dates Jason would have known, she gained access to a safety deposit box containing a weatherproof case of digital storage drives and handwritten notes detailing a complex money laundering operation that linked Senator Harrington to several international criminal organizations. Patricia made copies of everything before returning home, her mind racing. As she pulled into her driveway that evening, she immediately sensed something was wrong. The front door stood slightly ajar. Instead of entering, she backed away silently, got into her car, and drove to her son's apartment across town. By morning, news reports showed her home engulfed in flames, an apparent gas leak. Patricia knew better. Keanu, who had inherited his father's analytical mind, immediately took charge after hearing her story. "We need to get you somewhere safe," he insisted, already packing essentials. "I know a place in Montana. Dad's old friend has a cabin there." 3 days later, they arrived at Robert's hunting cabin deep in the Montana wilderness. Despite being John's brother, Robert had distanced himself after the funeral, throwing himself into his FBI career. The cabin was seldom used but well maintained, and most importantly, off the grid. "You need to learn to protect yourself," Keanu had insisted on their second day there, producing the revolver that had belonged to his father. "Whoever these people are, they're not going to stop. Also, you're harboring a material witness, potentially destroying evidence and interfering with a federal investigation," Robert said, sitting across from Patricia at the cabin's rough-hewn table. His coffee remained untouched. "Not to mention the illegal weapons. That's rich, coming from the man who abandoned his family when they needed him most," Keanu snapped, pacing the small kitchen. "Keanu," Patricia warned softly. To Robert, she said, "John died 15 years ago. The trail is cold." "Not anymore." Robert placed a file on the table. 3 of Harrington's former associates have turned up dead in the past month, and then there's Jason Miller. Patricia's hands tightened around her mug. "How did you know about Jason?" "Studio security footage. Your face when you recognized him triggered facial recognition." Robert leaned forward. "Pat, I need whatever John left behind. The Bureau has been building a case against Harrington for years, but we've never had enough to move on. This could be our chance." "Our chance?" Keanu interrupted. "Where were you when they burned down Mom's house? Where were you for 15 years? Robert's face hardened. "Doing my job, trying to put away the people who killed my brother." "Stop it, both of you," Patricia said sharply. She reached into her bag and withdrew a sealed envelope. "This is everything John had. I made copies." Robert took the envelope, his expression unreadable. "You should have come to me immediately." "Like you came to us after John died?" The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Robert's eyes met hers, and for a moment she glimpsed the grief he'd been carrying. "I couldn't face you," he admitted quietly. "I was the one who recommended John for the Harrington investigation. His death is on me." The confession hung in. The air between them, 15 years of unspoken pain, crystallized in a single moment. That night, as Keanu slept and Robert reviewed John's files, Patricia stepped outside onto the cabin's small porch. The Montana sky stretched endlessly above her, stars piercing the darkness with ancient light. How had her life come to this? A designer who had spent decades creating beauty was now learning to shoot a gun, running from killers. The door creaked behind her as Robert stepped out. "You always did prefer the night sky," he said, joining her at the railing. "It reminds me how small our troubles are," she replied. "Not small enough to ignore," Robert said. "Harrington's announcing his presidential run next week. If we're going to move, it has to be soon." Patricia turned to face him. "What exactly are you proposing?" "We need you to testify, to present John's evidence and tell the world what happened." "And paint a target on my back? On Keanu's?" Robert stepped closer. "We can protect you. Like you protected John?" The words escaped before she could stop them. Pain flashed across Robert's face. "I have to live with that every day, Pat. Please don't make the same mistake I did, thinking that silence equals safety. It doesn't. It just delays the inevitable." Patricia looked away, back to the stars. "I need time to think." "We don't have much of that left," Robert warned, but left her alone with the night sky and her thoughts. 2 days later, as they finalized their plan to get Patricia to a secure FBI location, the first shots tore through the cabin windows. Robert shoved Patricia to the floor, drawing his weapon in one fluid motion. "Back room!" he shouted to Keanu. "Get her out through the tunnel." Keanu pulled Patricia toward the bedroom, where a hidden trapdoor led to a narrow tunnel John had built as an emergency exit. Patricia resisted, looking back at Robert. "Go," Robert ordered, returning fire toward the trees. "I'll hold them off." The last she saw of him was his silhouette against the cabin door, weapon raised, as determined in protecting her as he had been distant in grieving his brother. Patricia and Keanu emerged from the tunnel a quarter-mile from the cabin, the sound of gunfire echoing through the forest. They ran until her lungs burned, following the escape route they had prepared. When they reached the hidden vehicle, Keanu took the wheel, driving recklessly down Forest Service roads until they reached the highway. "We can't leave him," Patricia insisted, her voice breaking. "He made his choice," Keanu said grimly, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "And he gave us a chance. We need to take it." 3 days and 2 stolen vehicles later, they arrived in Washington, D.C., exhausted and desperate. Using burner phones purchased along the way, Patricia contacted the one journalist John had trusted, Catherine Simmons, now an executive, editor at the Washington Post. "I need 30 minutes, Patricia told her. "Then you can decide if my story is worth the risk." They met in a crowded cafe, where Patricia handed over copies of John's files and recounted everything, from his initial suspicions 15 years ago to the attack on the cabin. Catherine listened without interruption, her experienced eyes evaluating both Patricia and the evidence. "This is explosive," Catherine finally said. "But you know what happens next, don't you? Once this publishes, there's no going back. Your life will never be the same." "My life ended 15 years ago," Patricia replied. "I've just been going through the motions. It's time to finish what John started." As they left the cafe, Patricia's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Still alive. Evidence secured. Meeting arranged with director. Hold position. R." Relief washed over her like a physical force. Robert had survived. "What is it?" Keanu asked, noticing her expression. Before she could answer, the distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle split the air. Catherine crumpled to the sidewalk beside them, blood blooming across her chest. Patricia's protective instincts took over as she dropped to her knees, applying pressure to the wound. "Get down!" Keanu shouted, shielding his mother as people scattered in panic around them. Another shot ricocheted off the concrete near Patricia's feet. Through the chaos, she glimpsed a figure on a distant rooftop, a sniper taking aim for a third shot. Then, suddenly, black SUVs screeched to a halt around them. FBI agents poured out, weapons drawn, creating a protective perimeter. Among them was Robert, his face bruised but determined. "Get them in the vehicle," he commanded. 2 agents pulled Patricia away from Catherine as medical personnel took over. "She has the files," Patricia gasped as Robert bundled her into an SUV. "We'll get them," he assured her, signaling the driver to move. Hours later, in a secure FBI safe house, Patricia learned that Catherine had survived surgery but remained in critical condition. The thumb drive containing John's evidence was now in FBI possession, and arrests were being prepared. "It's over," Robert told her, sitting heavily in a chair across from her. "Harrington's been taken into custody. His financial backers are scrambling. The whole network is coming down." Patricia studied his exhausted face. "How did you find us in D.C.? "I know you," he said simply. "Where else would you go but straight to the source of power? It's what John would have done." The door opened and Keanu entered, his face tense but relieved. "They're saying it's going to be the biggest corruption case in decades," he told them, setting down his phone. Patricia closed her eyes, 15 years of grief and fear finally beginning to lift. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now," Robert said, reaching across to take her hand, "we pick up the pieces. Together this time." 3 months later, Patricia stood at John's grave for the first time since his funeral. The media frenzy had finally begun to subside as Senator Harrington and 12 co-conspirators awaited trial. Her testimony had been recorded and sealed, her safety still a priority even as the threat diminished. Robert stood a respectful distance away, giving her privacy. Their relationship remained complicated, too much history and hurt to simply erase, but they were finding their way back to family. "I finished it," she whispered to the headstone. "It took too long, but I finished what you started." The autumn wind rustled the trees overhead, carrying the first fallen leaves of the season. Patricia placed a single stone on top of the grave marker, an old family tradition John had always observed. As she turned to walk away, she felt lighter than she had in 15 years. The distance between who she had been and who she had become, between the echoes of the past and the possibilities of the future, no longer seemed insurmountable. Robert fell into step beside her as they walked back toward the waiting car, where Keanu leaned against the hood, sunlight glinting off his father's watch on his wrist. "Ready?" Robert asked. Patricia nodded, looking ahead. "Yes," she said. "I think I finally am."